back here today with, and I believe you pronounce your last name Schramm. Is that correct?
Schramm.
Schramm. Okay. She's a research assistant and international conference planner at the College of Health and Human Services at the University of Toledo, and we are glad to have her today to have a conversation about her work.
Hi, Walter. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Okay. And you, from looking through your background, you had your undergrad was in social work. What made you take up human trafficking and social justice as kind of your graduate work?
Yeah. So I knew I wanted to go into social work for my undergrad and kind of throughout my college career, learned a lot more about human trafficking and realized that through my social work degree, I could have a large impact in the field of human trafficking and social justice. As I continued in my education, kind of realized that where my strengths and passions lie mostly with like the macro end of social work. So not really more on the micro end of kind of like case management or direct therapy or counseling with victims of trafficking. I saw myself being more on the community level in community organizing, program development, education, research. So as going through graduating with my with my undergrad in social work, knew I wanted to go on to get a master's in social work. And so went to the University of Toledo, saw that they had a human trafficking and social justice institute. So I was lucky enough to do my master's of social work internship there. And then after I graduated later that year, they hired me on. So I've been there ever since.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting because I think a lot of people think when they think of social work, they think of the case management, and I think a lot of times it's working with children that are in difficult situations. So, can you explain a little bit about how what it is you do, as you said, on the macro level that involves social work and how that correlates with working with human trafficking? And,
Yeah. So, yeah, I think like you mentioned, when people think of social work, they typically think of, child protective services or things like that, someone who's a case manager. But what I love about social work after, getting to know what it's like a bit better is that it is so diverse. You can do so many things with it in your career, whether you do want to stay on the case management end of things or do individual therapy, counseling, open your own practice, or you can do stuff in like administration, or you can do stuff in creating policies and working with legislators. You can do research as a social worker. Kind of more on my end is a lot of the community planning, development, education. I know social workers who work like in coalitions and work with community members to get them educated and work with people who are directly serving the victims of human trafficking, but as social workers, like their clients are the professionals of the people who are serving victims. So it's kind of just more on like you just kind of step back and look at it more from like an overview perspective. And for me, I plan an international human trafficking and social justice conference. So I like to kind of think of my role as like event planning meets social work. So it's a lot of organizational stuff, but also I know I'm using my social work skills, and like the content of the conference itself is very social justice focused.
and is that conference, or is that the Global Association of Human Trafficking Scholars, or is that a different conference you're speaking of?
Those are similar but different. So yeah, the Global Association of Human Trafficking Scholars, those are just individuals who are researchers around the world who are we support in collaborating together and producing new research. And then a lot of the times those global scholars are the ones who are presenting at our International Human Trafficking and Social Justice Conference.
And can you tell us about that conference and what goes into that and who's involved?
Yeah, so we are our oldest and largest conference on human trafficking in the world. This year is our 20th annual conference. My boss, Dr. Celia Williamson, created this conference 20 years ago, and it's been going ever since. We are a multi-day conference. Now, since COVID, we have switched and stayed to being a virtual conference. And with that, we've just been able to reach more individuals across the world who need this information. So we have thousands of people who come every year. Over the past 20 years, we've had representatives from each, well, attendees, not like political representatives. So attendees who have attended from all 50 states in the country. And then we have had attendees from 50 countries around the world. So it's been really cool to watch those numbers continue to increase over the past several years as we've made the conference more accessible to people. The conference is also very diverse. So not only do we have diverse attendees in their like backgrounds and occupations, we also have diverse knowledge levels. So we have people who will attend the conference who know nothing or very little about human trafficking, just heard about it, want to, get involved, educate themselves. And then we have people who range, who are very educated. They have been doing this work for decades in the field. And then, we have a variety of kinds of people. So we have survivors who come and they will attend or they'll speak. We have direct service providers like social workers, counselors. We have law enforcement and legal professionals. We have healthcare providers. We have researchers and a lot of students come to the conference and educators, and then, just some community members and advocates. So, there's kind of a little bit of everything. We have so many sessions, breakout sessions that happen throughout those 3 days. So we like to say that no two people really attend the same conference, kind of based on what sessions they want to attend. So somebody could attend and just want to go to survivor sessions the entire time and hear survivors' personal stories. Or if they're a researcher, they can go to all research sessions and hear about the latest research that's being done in the field. So yeah, we kind of are very diverse and have a little bit of everything for everyone.
And ART's signups are happening in the next few months, correct, for this year's conference?
Yeah, so the conference is hosted in the fall. So this year our dates are September 20th and 20th through September 20th through the 22nd. Right now we are in the process of collecting presentation submissions. So people who are interested in presenting at the conference, those actually are open through March 31st. So we still do have a little time if people are interested in submitting to present. And then registration for the conference opens June 1st. So starting on that June 1st date, people can register, but we try to keep our website as updated as possible so people can go on there and see what information we already have.
And what is the link to that website so people can listening will know where to go?
Yeah, the link for our website is just traffickingconference.com. And then if people have any questions, they can email me at traffickingconference@gmail.com.
Okay, yeah, that's definitely great to know. It's and I guess that does tie into what is like some of the biggest things that you think people need to be aware of when it comes to trafficking? Is it just awareness? Is there a specific thing that needs to be done for media individuals like myself? Like, how do we raise awareness so people know it actually is a problem in the United States and that this is happening around the world and it's not a thing of the past?
Yeah, great question. I think awareness and education is key, but within that, like accurate education, there's a lot of myths about human trafficking. I think a lot of people will see things on social media that either glamorize human trafficking in a way that's like scare tactics to be scared of things, or watch out for this is going to happen. And yes, those things do happen. And yes, you need to be aware of everything, but accurately educating yourself about what human trafficking is and about what typical victims look like and what populations they're coming from. Like 90% majority of victims are not snatched and grabbed, or they're not forced into it. A lot of it is manipulation and coercion, and it's very sneaky to see. So sometimes you don't know, or a victim won't identify as a victim. And it's a very, very minimal percent that it's actually that, snatching from the mall, or somebody's in a car and they're going to grab you. And so like, yes, those things, you need to be aware of that. But I think knowing the signs and, what to do. So then if you educate yourself on the signs and know the vulnerable population. So I know there's also a thing that goes around. It's like, oh, well, anybody can be trafficked. And yes, to its core, that statement is true, but there are populations that are more likely to be trafficked. And these we call like at-risk or vulnerable populations. And that is runaway youth, people in the LGBTQ community, people of color. So focusing our attention on those vulnerable communities instead of just going to, the white middle class communities and educating them like, yes, that is good, but we really need to be focusing our attention on those vulnerable populations. So once you, kind of know the signs and those who are at risk, knowing, how to report something. So the National Human Trafficking Hotline, which is 1-888-373-7888. So having that number kind of in your head or in your phone so you can report something. It's a national number, but when you go and call, it will direct you to the closest like FBI task force in your area. And I think another way to get involved after you've educated yourself is find what groups in your community are doing this work, whether that be a local coalition. There's all these different kinds of words for it, but like a coalition, a collaborative task force or something like this. And so, because there's probably people in your area or, in the next largest city close to you who are doing this work. And so getting involved and seeing where they need help. And, it's always better to work smarter, not harder, see what all is being done. And so working with your community.
I think you brought up a great point there because a movie I actually really enjoyed, Taken. That's a
Yes.
very specific type of movie that's supposed to be entertaining, but it points or paints a picture that's not exactly how a lot of trafficking happens. That's correct?
Yes, yeah, that is correct. I know that movie has kind of clouded people's vision of what human trafficking looks like, and I think a lot of it's glamorous in a way to kind of paint it in that way because it brings in money, it brings in views, it sells. And I think a lot of like media and marketing kind of use those stories or those images. Think of a girl with either a hand over her face or duct tape over her mouth, or she's in chains in the corner. And so we kind of paint this picture in our mind of this scared little girl who has been stolen off the streets. And I do want to say again, like, yes, that does happen, but that is not the majority of the victims. And so kind of then we have a stereotype in our head of what a victim looks like, and we're not actually helping the majority of victims who are in need.
And we can talk on that for a second. So you are in the state of Ohio for working for Toledo's. Is human trafficking like a gigantic problem in Ohio? And what do the survivors in Ohio, what is basically their background? They are typically runaways, people of color, or what's socioeconomic level? Are there people that you, or not exactly specific people, but is there type of things that you can look at and see like if they match these specific criteria that they are in need of help and might be a victim of trafficking?
Yeah, so going to that first part of your question, it's with like, is Ohio or Toledo, specifically bad for trafficking? I think that's not hard to answer, but there have been some like misconceptions with that. Like there have been statements in the past that Toledo is in the top 5 cities for trafficking around the world. And that is kind of like a skewed research statistic. So like we have a high number of reported cases or a high number of calls, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we are worse for trafficking. I think it points to how educated our community is. And so since we're more educated, we're looking for these things, we're aware of these things. And so there's more calls being made. I mean, my boss, Dr. Celia Williamson, she has been in the Toledo community since the 90s doing this work, and she is internationally known for her work in trafficking. So we have a very world-renowned researcher and educator in our city. So that means our direct service providers are being educated, our law enforcement know what to look for, and are, doing undercover operations, making arrests. So our numbers seem higher, but that's because we are doing something. So, I think it happens in every major city, but it's hard since it's such a underground illegal activity. Obviously, it's hard to know accurate numbers, but as far as like what victims kind of look like in our area, I don't really have a lot of data on that personally, but I would say kind of just looking at those vulnerability factors. So see a lot of, socioeconomic status plays a part into it. Like I mentioned, people of color, runaway youth, LGBTQ community. We even see it a lot in the developmental disability population, especially related to like labor trafficking. Ohio, we do have some major cities, but it is mostly a rural state. So there's, sex trafficking that is happening in rural areas, but also a lot of labor trafficking that is happening. So, just trying to look out for those vulnerability factors.
Yeah, a couple of questions off of that. What does labor trafficking look like in Ohio? I mean, Stop Now looks into labor trafficking on kind of a big corporate scale, but what does it look like in a rural community?
Yeah, so I know there have been a couple large cases of labor trafficking in Ohio. I just can't think of them off the top of my head, but it looks like, there's a lot of, there's a high immigrant population in Ohio. And so a lot of migrant workers who come over in the warmer months and they work on farms or in factories and they are not paid a fair wage. A lot of it is, like under the table cash or and then working environments are not safe. They also might have been promised a certain amount of money, but once they get there, they aren't receiving what they were promised, especially if they were brought up to Ohio and like their plane ticket or their bus ride was paid for by their employer, I'll put it in quotes. Or, technically their trafficker, then their trafficker will be like, okay, well, you're not getting any money right now because you have to pay off your debt of what I paid for your flight, your bus ticket. Maybe if they're living on the farm or near the factory, they will be like, okay, well, also all of your money that you make is going towards housing, even if housing they're living with, multiple people and unsafe living conditions. Sometimes traffickers will also hold their documents. So if they wanted to leave because they felt like they were in an unsafe situation, they would have a hard time leaving because they might be an undocumented migrant living in Ohio. So a lot of these things to kind of look for is, they usually have if you see them out in the community, they might have somebody with them who will speak for them so they don't have the opportunity to speak for themselves to say that they are in an unsafe living environment. Or a lot of times you'll see maybe a lot of hospital visits if there's a lot of dangers in the work environment, repeated hospital visits, or if they go to an emergency room, a clinic, and there's a lot of like old injuries that maybe, okay, if you broke your arm, you would go to the emergency room right away. And maybe this broken arm happened a week ago because they didn't seek emergency care right away because they might not be living in a safe environment or be able to access healthcare. So it's a lot more nuanced, it's harder to see. And I think it is good that Stop Now and other people are focusing on labor trafficking because it's not talked about enough. I think most people, when they hear the word human trafficking, they think automatically sex trafficking. And I think that's because that's more of what media and society talks about, but labor trafficking is just as big, if not bigger, of an issue.
And I think that's a very interesting point that you bring up. Would HIPAA regulation allow a doctor or nurse, if they expected that, to report it to the authorities or anyone, or is that a legal gray area there?
If it is an individual who's under the age of 18 years old, I believe they would be able to automatically report it, especially to Children's Services. If it's an individual that's over 18, I believe they would need that patient's permission to grant consent. I think they could give them resources on the human trafficking hotline and other resources that they could then take with them. But if that individual is there in the emergency room and is wanting help, then they would be able to intervene right there in those medical environments. I think healthcare workers also do have an important role just because they might be seeing victims of trafficking, both sex and labor, more often than the typical person. And it's hard sometimes to identify if a person does need help because typically either their trafficker or somebody else in charge is with them at all times and speaking for them. But because of the power and authority that a healthcare professional has, they can sometimes find out a way to get that patient alone and kind of check in with them, see if they do actually need help and they want to seek help. So I think healthcare providers, needs to be mandated education for healthcare providers all across the country. I know some states mandate it, but not all states. So more education needs to be, held for those healthcare professionals.
And another interesting thing that you said is that you said the LGBT community and runaways are at a higher risk as well. Is there a crossover there? Is it typically LGBTQ runaways that might have been kicked out of their houses, or what is the data that goes into that?
I don't specifically have numbers or like data for that, but I know both of those individually are risk factors. And then I think if you have an LGBTQ youth who is also a runaway, I think that really increases your risks. A lot of the manipulation and grooming tactics that traffickers use is the sense of love and trust and belonging, and providing you all of the things that maybe your home life didn't. So I think especially for runaway youth and then LGBTQ runaway youth, they did not receive that love and acceptance and belonging in their home life or even among their friends. So then if a trafficker comes along, poses as a friend or even a boyfriend and tells them that they are loved and accepted and beautiful, and buys them things, lets them crash at their place, then that is a very easy way to kind of build that trust of that vulnerable youth and then kind of groom them into the life of trafficking.
And what would be advice that you would give someone who might be vulnerable to trafficking? Like, what are some of the things that you would tell them to look out for? Like you just mentioned several that could be there, like just for individuals trying to avoid the situations themselves.
Yeah, I would say, especially for youth, know what healthy relationships versus toxic relationships look like. I know sometimes, especially when you're young, sometimes those lines blur between what is healthy and what is toxic. But I think knowing what healthy relationships look like, knowing your boundaries and setting those boundaries, finding a good group of people that you can trust, and maybe a trusted adult that you can go to if, you have questions about somebody who might be a toxic person and you don't know. So I think really knowing what healthy relationships, boundaries, and consent look like, those main three things will kind of set you up to be more empowered, and empowered individuals are less likely to get trafficked.
And what are some of the preventable steps that you think society can do to help prevent trafficking, whether that's human or, I mean, not human, whether it's labor or sex trafficking? I do know there's a lot of work being done to talk about what's the difference between consent and coerced and forced, and that kind of work, especially when it revolves around sex work. I know a lot of people working on that in that field, but as far as like labor trafficking as well, like what are some things that we can help? Because again, as you mentioned, it's something that's not talked about and kind of shunned as a thing that could never happen in the United States because we're a first world country and the most per capita in the world, but these things do happen. So what are some things that you think that we could do in the United States to help prevent trafficking from happening?
Yeah, I think, like I mentioned earlier, accurately educating yourself on the issue and not kind of just believing what the myths are, the posts that you see on Facebook or things like that, but accurately educating yourself both on sex and labor trafficking. As far as labor trafficking, I think holding businesses accountable. If think an easy way for an individual to kind of see how labor trafficking impacts their life, there's these websites that will tell you based on the products that you own, which ones or how many slaves work for you. So I think, identify, it's very eye-opening when you do something like that, but identifying, like what products can you switch to that are ethically sourced and fair trade, holding businesses accountable to certain standards, and then also like funding organizations that are meeting those standards of ethically sourced and fair trade items so that they can continue to compete in the market. But I think just, educating yourself and making wiser purchasing choices. People have a strong voice when we work together. And so the more people that know about it and will make better informed choices we're going to make a difference.
Yeah, again, you said something very interesting there. You said like how many slaves work for you. Or do you think that that is an important term to put to what some of these people are being forced and coerced into as in modern slavery? Like, because I think people want to look at slavery like, well, you're getting paid, therefore you're not a slave. Well, that's why the word modern's in front of it. So do you think that's a term that should be used more to put a stamp on this is serious, this is a problem, these people are kind of stuck in these situations, they can't do anything to get out of it?
Yeah, because I mean, if individuals are being paid, you need to look at how much they're being paid. I mean, we all know inflation is very high, and the cost of living is continuing to increase, and there are still individuals who are making less than minimum wage in these labor trafficking situations, and or individuals in other countries who are being paid cents or dollars for their work. And yes, they are being paid, but what is what is the cost of living in that society, and what is their work environment like? Because it's not just about necessarily the money they're receiving, but how many hours are they working? Is it a safe working environment? Are they able to come and go freely without threat of force or abuse? So yeah, thinking about some of these things, it's different from necessarily what we considered slavery centuries ago, but it is still people who are not free to come and go as they please. And so yeah, I think that answers your question.
And I guess, yeah, could you also talk to us a little about the Partners Against Trafficking in Humans program?
Yes. So we have a program through the Human Trafficking and Social Justice Institute at University of Toledo that is called Partners Against Trafficking in Humans. We call it PATH, and short for the acronym of it. And this is, I'm not the lead of this project, so I'm going to try to explain it the best that I can. In kind of simple terms, but it is a coordinated community effort to bring together all of the service providers who are working in our community to serve victims of trafficking. And we have different pathways that this all falls into. So whether that be like the housing pathway that, victims need housing, whether that's a legal pathway that victims either need like a protection order, or maybe they need their records expunged because of crimes that they were forced to commit during their trafficking situation. Maybe they need the mental health pathway, and they need counseling and trauma services. So there's all these different pathways. And we wanted to see, instead of people doing their own thing individually in all these places, is this actually working? What is everybody doing? Let's link clients to the pathways they need and follow them, so we can hopefully move victims to survivors and survivors to thrivers, because that is ultimately our goal, is to get them to be thrivers. So yeah, we just there's a lot of research that goes into it to kind of see like, okay, how many mental health appointments does a client need that they, after the assessments that they take, they would identify themselves as a survivor? How many appointments do they need until they, think of themselves as a thriver? And so we're tracking all of those services, and, kind of just coordinating all of the services as well. So then each client or each victim has their own caseworker that works with them to connect them to all of those services, so they kind of don't feel lost and like, I don't know where to go, I don't know how to access these services. Their case manager works with them to then connect them to everything that they need. So it's a great program, and I don't know how long it's been around, but I love that we still have it, and I hope that we continue to keep it around, have it funded, and help it grow.
Okay, and I guess, yeah, that's also a very important thing as well for a lot of organizations working on trafficking. Is there any way to donate to the various things that you are working on?
Yes, yeah. So specifically for the international conference that I host, we do have sponsorship opportunities. So if you're interested in donating to the conference, you can go to that website, which is traffickingconference.com, donate to that. You are also able to donate to the Human Trafficking and Social Justice Institute. That kind of is like the big umbrella of all of our projects, including the PATH project that I just talked about. So I can pull up the website for that. You might be able to just search Human Trafficking and Social Justice Institute to find that. But so that website is utoledo.edu/HHS/HTSJI. And we're always looking for additional funds, additional supports to keep our programs up and running. So if you feel so inclined to donate to us, your money will definitely be put to good use.
Yeah, and before we wrapped up, was there anything else that you wanted to talk about or promote that's coming up in any of your work?
I think we covered it. The main thing is probably just the conference. So I'm not entirely sure when this will air, but if you're interested in presenting at the conference, those submissions need to be in by March 31st. The registration opens June 1st. You can find more information at traffickingconference.com or email me at traffickingconference@gmail.com.
Okay, and it was great talking to you. We should definitely stay in touch, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Walter. You too.
Thank you.